my tendency for for some time now, for several years, many years, probably since social media first showed up, has been that all of this social media and the internet and that everything that we think of when we think of that is really kind of consumed by a creeping rot, and what had held such promise is now tarnished and decaying. And
Yeah, yeah.
in the last few days, that opinion has started to change.
Really?
Yeah, and it really is a case of where I've watched it happen, and there hasn't been any desire or intention. It's just been something that has happened all on its own. It started with something I don't recall exactly what, because it's only been in the last 5 days or so that this has happened. But of course, whole other story. I've been seriously sleep deprived. I've had several nights of really bad sleep due to, it wasn't anything I could that I had done, but that's an absurd sentence.
I know what you mean, though.
It's just something that it's just the way this week has played out.
Yeah.
Um, but there was something political that showed up, and I think Susanna told me about it. I forget. And it dawned on me that if the internet wasn't present, there would be things going on that no one would really be able to find out about easily.
Yeah.
It would not be something that was well broadcast, because the legacy media is more about absolutely about controlling the flow of information,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah.
very much a case of gatekeeping writ large. And
Yep.
now we have the internet, and even in its worst manifestations, the for as bad as it can be, there's still this decentralization and this ready access to media, and information is getting spread around, quite literally at the speed of light,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
and people are finding things out, you know, almost instantaneously. Something happens in the morning before the morning is even halfway through. Millions upon millions of people
Yeah.
know about it,
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
nothing. They've been trying to find a way to clamp down the internet since, I guess it was the early 2000s. I remember when they handed over the control of the FCC to, I forget his name. He was an Indian guy, East Indian guy, and everyone was sure that was going to be the end of the internet
Mhm.
as we knew it. And even if there's some truth to that, a lot of truth to that, they haven't been able to do anything about the decentralized aspect
Yeah.
of the spread of information.
Yeah, that's
As
true.
Terrence McKenna said, information's loose on planet three.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. Only issue with that is that there's also no way to clamp down on misinformation and
Right.
disinformation. And so it just becomes that double-edged sword where it's wonderful that we have so much access to stuff, but we also, as a species, don't seem to be good with discriminating between, what's actually true and what just feels it creates that sense of like fear or outrage or disgust or whatever that we thrive on, and then just immediately take it on because it, coincides with some pre-held belief that I have or some worldview that I want to see maintained or whatever. And
Well,
it's
it's
yeah.
interesting you should say that, because that's exactly what happened in my case. Was there was a pre-existing or an already existing pre-existing. I hear George Carlin. How can something exist before it exists? Um,
It's funny.
but so there's this already held belief, this idea that was already there about the internet, and a fairly cynical and pessimistic one, and on its own, just because of the flow of things,
Yeah.
um, something happened, and that began to shift and change. And I still recognize that there's um, all the things you said,
Mhm.
basically. All the things you said are true, no argument. Um, but I'll take the bad with the good because, at least for right now, and it has been this way for some time, that in spite of all of the swill and garbage
Yeah.
that comes pouring out of the monitor or out of your device when looking at the internet, there's still a tremendous amount of positive stuff that happens as a result of it. And
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, I, you really can't separate them. So I just
Mhm.
recognize that there's all of this bleh.
Yeah.
And, be that as it may, there's still a tremendous amount of good, and it makes it makes it really hard for those who want to try to control things, those with their hands on the reins of power.
Yep.
It makes it, very difficult. It's sometimes even impossible for them to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with that.
and more there's this. There are two things, that I, you know, I've mentioned a lot over the time that we've talked about recovery, and of
Yeah.
course, because it's so central to the way my life has developed, including it has everything to do with why you and I are even talking right now.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm way more than a recovering, or actually, I say in my case, recovered alcoholic.
Mhm.
Um, I am a recovering pessimist and cynic and misanthrope.
Yeah.
And so the inclination is to either, very much again to bring up Carlin's name. George Carlin said in his last, in the last 10 years or so of his life that, um, or maybe even longer than that, but there was a period of time towards, the end of his life where he said that he was just divorced from all of this.
Mhm.
It wasn't anger. It wasn't anything of that sort. It was just he was divorced from it. It's like, I don't care. I don't want. I'm watching. It's interesting to watch what the species does, but I'm
Mhm.
not invested in it. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm more and more. I find myself either I'm not invested in it. It's like, go ahead, knock yourselves out.
Yep.
Um, Go ahead, blow yourselves up. Whatever you want to do. I'm just
Mhm.
watching.
Yeah.
Or there's this move towards optimism.
That's right.
And it might even be defined as a radical optimism because it's an optimism that maybe a lot of people would think is kind of nuts in the face of things. Like, don't care.
Yeah.
Don't care. That's the view I'm taking because it's a much nicer view than the alternative.
It's true. It's true. I mean, ultimately, wow. Pessimism and optimism are both just inherently derived, from the mind imagining what the future might hold and then deciding which of those you want to lock into.
Yeah.
Neither one has any more basis in reality than the other. But I think for some of us, pessimism feels more uh, ironically safe because it's like you can't be
Hmm.
hurt if you already expect the worst. If you're
Yeah.
optimistic, you can be let down if things don't go your way. But if you're inherently pessimistic, you've already braced yourself for the worst things can be. And then it's like, oh, well, from then I can only be positively surprised. Like maybe my worst fears don't come to fruition. So yeah, okay, I guess things worked out better than expected. Yay. But still, I'm going to expect everything is going to be shit from now on anyhow. So it's like having that, but it just comes from what your baseline comfort level is with imagining the future and with dealing with imagination in general. I mean,
Hmm.
if we were really truly just present here now without any of that, pessimism and optimism don't even exist. That
That's
has to
true.
be a concept that we're invoking because of some idea that something could be other than it is right now. And it has, just so many other layers of interwoven storylines and things that have to come through with it. But I get your point that, for uh in general, I think if we like really believe our pessimism, it sends us potentially down very, dark spirals of depression and nihilism and meaninglessness and all that stuff that can kind of come along with that.
Well, it plays a central role in why I began to see drinking as an option back in what was that, 2001?
Yeah.
I mean, it had. I mean, there were a couple of other things, but it was one of the two or three primary reasons why that happened. Whereas before, I rarely even touched alcohol. Um,
Ironic how it can also become a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way, isn't it?
how so?
Well, you have the sense of pessimism that everything's going to go bad, and so then you start just numbing
Oh,
yourself, and then your
yeah,
life somehow gets worse. It's funny how that happens.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what you said is a really good point, and I had never considered that pessimism and
Optimism.
yeah, pessimism and optimism don't really exist without an eye for the future,
Yeah.
eye towards the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the more neutral or detached sense shows up is that most of the time I'm not thinking of or have any sense of what's
Mhm.
going on except
Yeah.
for the present and what might be coming in the next few minutes or so.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I don't know how that works. I mean, I know that it has everything to do with that peculiar shift in my sense of time. Fall before last. But it's curious how it takes somebody saying something to me about a given something in order to draw my mind towards something further down the line.
Yeah.
Um, but optimism. It seems to me, well, maybe not. I was thinking it doesn't necessarily mean that um, to be optimistic or pessimistic, you have to be giving a whole lot of thought to the future. Um, because it seems that there can just be and I could be wrong about this, but it seems like just reflecting back on how it was that you can either be optimistic or pessimistic just in a general sense of that's just your attitude towards things.
Yeah, but it's kind of like because those are always about something that's not here now. It's always like, I can
Hmm.
be optimistic that okay, I don't know why I'm not coming up with a very simple optimistic um example, but it's like you can even that, I'm going to be optimistic that I'm going to enjoy my meal later tonight, or I'm going to be pessimistic that, yeah, but it's not, it's not going to be really fulfilling or satisfying or whatever. But it still has to be about the future, even if it's just an hour later. There's never any pessimism or optimism about the way this moment is. It's all how it's going to affect through the chain of events going forward.
Hmm.
We can have this great conversation now, and if I'm not thinking about it, it's just a great conversation now. If I'm optimistic about it, then it's, yeah, and actually other people are going to listen to this and they're going to, find some value in it and they're going to wake up and they're going to have blah, blah, blah. Or if I'm pessimist about it, yeah, not that many people are going to watch it and they're probably just going to tune off or whatever. But there has to be some line of story that connects to this conversation being anything more than what it is. And I think it's what you say is correct that people do tend to have kind of a default position that they have, been conditioned into. And so whether you see the inherent positive outcomes of this conversation or, the more negative side of things, it's based on the conditioning of which of those options is more likely to spring to mind. But and that reflects the unique nature of that person. But ultimately, you still have to think beyond this moment in order for pessimism or optimism to have any meaning.
Well, where that idea came from, and this still seems to be partly hooked into the future, but not entirely, was that at that point in time in my life, I had just become so profoundly and utterly black in terms of my state of being
Yeah.
that something could happen, like I could be walking along and be carrying something and then run into something and something falls and breaks, like see, this is how
Yeah.
life is, this is how
Yeah.
life is.
Yeah.
And while I understand that there's kind of this that implies kind of this broader view in terms of time, it also at the same time is very much about what's happening right here.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
what's happening right here? expresses the overall sentiment.
Yeah, I would still expand on that though and say that it's because you had an expectation in the past that things were
Mhm.
going to be a certain way. And this is just, something dropping and breaking is one more example of why your overarching thesis that the world is a mess and it's going to, everything is terrible and it's only going to get worse. We're all devolving towards entropy is further entropy is like that you just you're finding things that will support that thesis. And so everything that breaks, if that's your idea that the world is, just devolving into chaos and everything that breaks, everything that goes wrong or whatever is just further proof. If you were somebody who had the optimistic side of things, those, even though they might happen, just don't register the same way. They don't have the same meaning imputed on them that they do if you're looking for reasons um, to find the world to be a pessimistic place. If you're an optimist, it might just be, wow, I woke up and the sun was shining through the window, and that had like this meaning for you because that's just has as much self-imputed meaning on the way the sun is hitting the uh the the frozen ice crystals on the window, and it just looks kind of magical in a way. That has the same kind of meaning as like, oh, and I knocked over my tea, and of course I did. Like it's just it's because of your starting point that we give any meaning to anything that exists.
Well, I'm not debating it. I agree with
Yeah.
you. I don't think that it has to necessarily be exclusively something that is outside of or beyond the present moment.
Yeah,
'Cause like I
yeah.
said, I first for it began in the 90s, and then when we moved to Athens, Georgia in 2001, and then I began drinking. Um, uh, I was already, by that point, I had already managed to very thoroughly nurse this misanthropic,
Mm.
pessimistic, just
Yeah.
state of being and how I viewed and interpreted everything.
Yeah.
Um, it was very much kind of, um, it became very much a present moment sort of thing because it was carried with me 24/7. And then, to go back to the example, something would happen. And what you said is absolutely true. Um, but yet, without anything at all happening, just simply the act of being, um, it was everything was rotten.
Yeah.
That was just the given assumption. And, to go take that back to where it started, and it's very much an idea I picked up from Robert Anton Wilson, who I've mentioned more than a few times.
Mm.
He said that same thing. I choose to have an optimistic, hopeful view of the world because it's much nicer.
Yeah.
It feels much better, and it
Yep.
does. And the thing I said out loud to myself one day in 2014 when it began in earnest, the whole spiritual search. Um, like getting all of these massive bills for things that we didn't actually owe, and the profound fear and anxiety that set off. And then, you know, out came the statement, I didn't get sober to live like this. And that still is
Mm.
very much true. But now instead of being based on being sober, it's just simply, I don't have much tolerance for suffering, stress, and unhappiness. I'm just not willing to put up with it.
No. I get that. I get that. And I think there is a sort of a deeper uh, implication to that idea that we can choose to be optimistic or not, and putting aside the whole idea of personal choice or whatever.
Right.
But it is because it is a mind created position. It's showing how mentally derived our interpretation of anything is. And it is largely a matter of our personal viewpoint of anything. You know, no matter what your political persuasion is, in any given situation, if there are half of the country who is against something, there's another half that is for it. Their interpretation completely defines whether you're super optimistic right now or super terrified watching the same news story,
Mhm.
because it depends on what your interpretive veil is that you happen to be using. And so having the willful position of, I'm just going to be optimistic about things, if you can like genuinely embody that, then it's just showing that we have this malleable way of creating our interpretive vision of everything, and it's not dictated by the events around us. It's dictated by our interpretation of and relationship to and resistance to those events that are happening.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
Yeah,
Okay, let me see if I can summarize that because
please,
that was really good.
please.
So it's not something that is our particular view of things is not something that is the result of or derived from the events going on around us. It is the result of or derived from conditioned mental postures.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, and it's how much we resist against it that causes the suffering about it. It's how much
Hmm.
how we're interpreting the event that makes it one way or another. And because of that, we do see people like you described who have deeply negative veils over everything. And so everything is going to be interpreted. It doesn't matter what it is. They win the lottery and they're going to interpret it as, yeah, and everybody's going to want my money and I'm going to be, and everybody who wins the lottery goes broke. You're going to twist it, whatever, so that it fits your premise about the way life is. And it's not inherent in the action of winning the lottery or spilling your tea or anything else. It's all in the interpretation of it, and that is a conditioned response based on everything that has come before, but specifically in this case, based on your views of what life is, should be, what it means, what your expectations are, how this moment is either confirming or subverting your expectations of how it was going to be. And then the resistance to that subversion, if it's happening. But all of that is like an active creation of our way of being.
Yeah. Huh. Well, and it seems like the at least in what you just said, it seems like the active element are the expectations.
Mm, yeah, very much. Very
And
much.
I
And
guess,
the resistance to when our expectations are either
oh,
not fulfilled or in some cases when they are. If we have those kind of negative expectations.
right. Hang on a minute. I just want to jot down a really quick
Yeah, yeah.
diagram of that. Um, so, okay. It's funny. It's one of those things that, yeah, it's kind of obvious when you say it out loud, but until you said it out loud, it never really was something that was clear that they're the expectations and then the resistance to when things don't go the way when they don't conform to our expectations.
Yeah, yeah. And also, if you, like I said, if you have that like negative, pessimistic attitude, there's an expectation that things are going to go bad, but that's usually not really what you want, right? Like when you had that, see there, I told you, life is like this.
Uh,
You don't really want life to be like that. That is
mhm,
itself a posture of resistance to life not being as good as you would like for it to be. And so you
mhm.
put yourself in this kind of negative posture that's a perpetual state of resistance against life. Then anything happens that again goes against what you would prefer happening, that's just reinforcing against that. And so it's a protective strategy because again, you can't get hurt if you already expect for things to be terrible all the time. You can't be disappointed. You always expect the worst. The Then you're just getting reinforced that, okay, of course the world is as bad as I thought. But there's can be that like subtle, still a little bit of that subtle resistance because life, when you have that, you know, you're expecting that life is like 100% bleak, 100% negative, and nothing can be 100% anything. So there are times when life will go your way, and you are
Mhm.
then either in resistance to the fact that this good thing happened and that, subverts my primary thesis that the world is always terrible, or you completely, fail to acknowledge it or accept it, or it just doesn't make its way into your tallying. And even when something bad does happen or something that you don't want does happen, even though you're getting that little jolt of like, haha, I was right. See, I told you so. That's a defense because you really would like for it to have gone differently. You really
Huh.
didn't want to drop the glass and break it. You really didn't want, whoever to leave you or whatever it was. It's 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 a defense to make yourself not feel the pain of life once again letting you down.
Okay. Um, One moment. Okay.
Mm.
All right. Well, when you said that, the first thought that popped up was, what a relief that that's not the place that I live my life from anymore.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I mean, I recognize that there are people who are, or people who might have what we could call maybe a situational pessimism
mm,
with just the way things are right now.
yeah,
Um, the the conditioned inclination, meaning what shows up more or less automatically most of the time, not all the time. Like the last week being so sleep deprived has caused. It was funny. It was kind of a brief education into the nature of conditioning and how you can manage to decondition things, but some of that other stuff can still be lurking there under the hood. And then
yeah,
you get really tired or something of that's, something that really stresses the system. And
mm,
some of that stuff will come bubbling back up. It won't show up the way it used to. It doesn't have necessarily the full force or intensity,
yeah,
and it might be modified in some other ways, but it can still reveal itself as still being there in some form or fashion.
yeah,
Um,
of course.
but what happens most of the time, just off the cuff, is this sense of things are right now, they're like this, but there's this feeling that this is actually a necessary process that leads to change for the better.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's not something that was willful where, okay, I'm going to think this. It's just in the process of retraining the mind to be more hopeful and optimistic and to give up the pessimism and the misanthropy and all of this, that's just what has appeared on its own. And it's also based on some experience because it seems like time and time again over the course of my life, the things that seemed really awful have almost always been a doorway to something better.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
that's a lot of why that shows up that way.
yeah. I get
So
that. I think it's probably not too heavy-handed to say that most pessimists are just traumatized optimists.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I say that again based on my own experience because I began once I started to develop into that, not a kid anymore, place that being a teenager leads to. There was just this bottomless idealism,
Yeah.
and then things started showing up that. contradicted or flew in the face of that idealism. And so, it more and more it was, oh, God, how can this be? And that's exactly what you said. There was this idealist, perhaps optimist, that just had all of their ideas about things, you know, kind of trampled on.
Yeah.
So, but in kind of in what everything has been said is there is this option for choice, whatever choice is, to which I guess let's call choice the preponderance of conditioned voices in the mind
Mm,
that tip the scale a
yeah.
particular direction.
Yeah, that's good.
Um, that there is this possibility for choice um, to have a better, um, more enjoyable view of events, no matter how bad they might appear to be. And the truth is that, and I don't mean to or intend to or want to go down this road, but I just want to say this as a kind of a, um, I think it's something that has to be kept in mind. Everyone's talking about how bad things are, and I'm thinking, if you think things are really awful right now, then you have not read any history. You
Yeah.
don't really
Sure.
understand history, at least of this country, in the last 60 odd years.
Yeah.
Because, there are people I know who are of an age that they felt exactly the same way about Nixon being in office and
Yeah.
Vietnam and the
Yep.
Kent's, the, let's not call them shootings, let's call them what they are, the murders at Kent State.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and I could run off a long list of things from that time period that you think this is bad?
Yeah.
You know, you need to take another look because it truly is a matter of perspective because, you know, you can go back on that timeline and find some seriously black stuff that very much competes with current events.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of those things where, we're going through it now. So anything
Mhm.
you're going through now always feels worse than what you've read in a textbook
Yeah,
or something about, time before you were born or, very, very distant memory. Um, and I think it's also that whatever happened in the past, we know it's done and it led to whatever it led to. Now I think
right.
it's more about the fear because it's an open-ended story.
Yeah.
It hasn't been written into a textbook yet where we can put it into its little convenient place and say that was its time in history and now look,
Yeah.
everything turned around and we're all fine and lovely now. I think it's really for people, it's like the fear of where does this lead? How far is it going to get? How bad is it going to get? And I think that's really what inspires people right now is not knowing, you know.
And I understand that, and I don't mean to diminish or minimize anyone's experience. I really don't.
Yeah.
So anyone who's hearing this, that's not, I'm sorry if that's how that sounds
Yeah,
or
yeah.
felt, but that was not the intention at all. Really, all I want is to try to encourage to try to have a broader perspective of what's going on
Yeah.
and recognize that um, if there's a willingness, and that's the operative principle that has to be there, otherwise it doesn't go anywhere. If there's a willingness, you can hold what I described a little bit ago as a radical optimism, and radical because it seems irrational, but you can hold a radical optimism in the face of what's going on. And why not? Because even if you are going to your doom, why be torn up about it? Why, if you know that you're heading over the cliff, I understand it's hard not to be afraid. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just a
Yeah.
natural process. But at the same time, it makes me think of Timothy Leary, how he was laughing the entire time that he knew he was on his way to his own demise. When
Mm,
after he got the diagnosis, he celebrated the whole thing. And
yeah.
I think that's, for whatever flaws he had as a person, I think that's commendable because why not choose the more positive, pleasant, enjoyable option? Why waste any time at all feeling miserable if you don't have to?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Completely in that regard. I think it's, we're in the subject of where it becomes really complicated because there's the questions of, personal responsibility in
Uh,
that relative side of things versus, whether it's personal versus cultural, or, how much you should be, doing on the behalf of others, and how much is selfish versus selfless. And, it's a big, big topic as far
yes.
as, and so it is, yeah, it is a thing where, oh boy, it's a big topic. Um, like Carl Jung had said that, we tend to be more well-adjusted, happier people when we have like a governing mythology in our life. That seems to help us. We tend to be happier when we have some sort of mythology. That can lead people to all sorts of beliefs that, just it doesn't necessarily have to be the best mythology, or, have anything true about it. But as long as we can resonate with it and it seems to reinforce some core principle that works for us, and we're happy having something that we believe in that way. Um,
Right.
why it's difficult with what, Pernilla and I do is we're basically getting people to question those beliefs as much as possible, and if possible, living with as few of those mythologies, as you can. But it doesn't
Yeah.
work for everybody. The difficulty is that in this sort of, the kind of political space, everybody has created for themselves a kind of line of where, whether you go the sort of Christian route of there's a greater plan for everything and God knows what he's doing, and, you can either get involved because you feel in some way compelled to help people even though God knows what he's doing, or sit back on the sidelines and do nothing because God knows what he's doing and he's going to sort it all out, and climate change can't exist and all of that because he wouldn't do that. Like you hear all sorts of different explanations coming from everybody based on their personal mythology. And it's just their interpretation of whether they should act or not, whether they should be concerned about something or not, based on their personal little belief system. And in the kind of Buddhist and non-duality world, I mean, you have all sorts of the, like, there's the what do you call it? Not active Buddhism, something like that, where it's like being more like, where Buddhism and the kind of bodhisattva vow is taken to mean that you should actually be more politically active, and, active and intentionally putting yourself on the line and
Oh, I know what
fighting
you're
other
talking
people.
about. I cannot remember the term that they gave that.
Yeah,
That
it's
was a Thich Nhat Hanh
yeah, and
thing, if I remember correctly.
I think Jack Cornfield is big in that, and I can't think of
Yeah,
the term, but you know what I mean. So it's
I do know what you're referring to.
and it really depends on what you see as, the value of a human life, of your human life, of, you know, the way that you should be interacting, and and it's different for everybody. It's not to say that there is one right or wrong answer. It's to note, is mostly from what my point is, it's important to note that anybody's view is your own conditioned view of what the right thing to do is. So for some people, being out and protesting and, putting themselves in the line of danger is the most rational, logical thing that they can do. Based
Right,
on their conditioning, it feels like the most important thing they can do in their life. For other people, it's sitting back and having a different idea of what is happening and what, how it's all going to play out. And, the optimism side of things might be for some people just a kind of way of staying passive and you know, comfortable without actually doing anything. And it can lead you or people to having um a kind of maybe false sense of security, maybe accurate sense of security, because again, we don't know how anything is going to play out. So but it's just to say that there isn't. one necessarily right or wrong approach. It's that, but that each of us, if we're doing this work, should be curious about why we have the approach that feels the most natural to us. Not just take it at face value that it is the way that it is, but just be curious. Why is it that my reaction towards seeing this on the news or seeing this in the street is to react, by running outside and doing something about it versus, you know, holding myself up in the house and, pulling down the curtains and, sealing myself in, or, having like an optimistic long range view, or having the kind of also sort of optimistic cosmic level view where you recognize that everything that happens on the planet with people is completely insignificant. As soon as you get, just a mile or two off the face of the earth, none of this has any relevance
Right.
whatsoever anyway. So I mean, we can take all these different views, and each of those inform the way that we're going to respond, both outwardly and inwardly, to everything that we hear. And so it's relevant for us to work with being curious of why we are acting that way, and recognize that it's not a guaranteed truth just because it feels right to us. But see, okay, so what in the conditioning is making it so okay, I have still this, very self-preservatory fear response that kicks in every time I see this. All right, so work with that. I have this feeling of outrage and injustice, and I have to get out there. Okay, so in what ways are you feel like a victim, or do you feel victimized, or are you trying to protect other people, and because you feel inherently, that empathy, which makes you feel uncomfortable as a victim too. And again, it's not to say that anybody should or shouldn't do any of those things, but just to use it as an introspective tool to find out why it is that we're acting the way that we are and believe the things that we believe.
Um, Hang on a second. Something you said there kind of had a not quite an aha moment, but something to that effect. Want to remember to ask you something,
Sure.
but because I do have a couple of things I need to discuss with you. But when you were saying that, all of a sudden it kind of like the way the whole thing with always coming back to bodily sensations,
Mm.
just that's primary. That's the first place you go, pretty much under all conditions.
Yeah.
Um, and it took forever for that to become clear and obvious to me. And of course, now that that's the case, it's still a case of remembering to do it in the moment. Um, which, that's another matter, but at
Yeah.
least now it's really clear that that really is just critically important. And that's one of the first things to go to.
Yeah.
Now it's the same kind of thing with being curious about things, because I've heard you say that more times than I could count. I've heard Pernilla say it since I first started watching her videos, what,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago. Um,
Exactly.
and it's only just now that it kind of hit me. It's like, oh, when things happen, you really need to be curious. And I mean, I do some. There is some inquiry on any given day. There is some inquiry, but there has not been enough of that curiosity about even the most seemingly mundane things.
Yeah. And that's where all of the insight lies. Well, maybe not all of it, but a lot of the
A
insight lies.
crap ton of it.
Exactly. A very, very large amount of it is under those things that are so taken for granted that it never occurred to us to question them. Nothing that we take for granted is the way that it is because it's true, because it's the way that it is. It's the way we take it for granted because, again, we have, been taught it, we have made assumptions about it, we have learned something. There is there is nothing that is so universally true in its um, presentation that it can go without being questioned. And especially those things which just get taken for granted. there is something really deep in that for us to look into because it is so part of our conditioned DNA that it hasn't even registered that there are other people out there who see it differently or could see it differently, or that it's not a universal position. And that is really interesting because that means we are completely identified with that particular belief.
Say that again about what leads up to being identified with a particular belief. I want to make sure I understood that.
Yeah, yeah, that if there is something which it has never dawned on you to question, that means that that is so completely identified with. It is part of your, the DNA of your whole worldview. So that is so completely identified with that it's never dawned on you to look at it. So
Okay.
that is the sort of thing that when you start, you haven't recognized that there's another viewpoint out there that you have never even given credence to, that it's never occurred to you that, yeah, of course, the color of my wall is brown. It's never occurred to you to question whether it really is brown or not. So, of course, scientists might tell you that it's actually absorbing all wavelengths, blah, blah, blah. But until we really question the basic foundations and basic tenets of our belief systems and the way that we view the world, we will find that there are so many things that we just take for granted because we're completely identified with the belief that that is the way that things are. And there are things, obviously, like we talk about politics, and people know that there are other sides of the aisle that believe something different. So even though you may be completely identified with, yeah, of course, but my side is right and theirs is clearly wrong, you still acknowledge the fact that there are other people who have a difference of opinion. But there are certain aspects of our reality that we just never think to question. It's just like
Right.
everybody sees, a traffic light is red or might not be a visual thing, but like there are concepts that we have that we just assume everybody is on board with. And it's just not. So, like even the thing of like we routinely talk about anxiety, fear, depression, happiness, all these things as real existing phenomenon. And most of us, until we start doing this kind of practice, don't ever stop to question whether fear is a real thing or what it even means to say that I'm feeling anxious about something. We just take it as a societal given. And if I say I'm anxious about a test I have coming up, you know exactly what I'm talking about and why I should be freaked out about it and all that. But is that really the case? What is that thing that we call anxiety? And when you start to get curious about the things that we say and the things that we're pointing to, and whether they really are the way that we seem to be conveying them or believe that they are existing, once we start to investigate those things, we start to find out they're not at all like I thought they were. That anxiety does not exist, at least not the way that I thought it did. There are
Right.
all sorts of different experiences and they cling together under a label, but other than that, it's really opening the door for uh, that's going to come out wrong. I was going to say it opens the door for your entire world falling apart, but it's not exactly the way I meant it.
Well, I mean, it stands for me. It still stands, because
Yeah,
I'm not uncomfortable with that.
yeah,
So, but I understand other people might be freaked out by that.
yeah, yeah. But it's just, you're really just the recognition, which is, from the neuroscience standpoint, that literally everything we're seeing is the brain's projection and prediction. That alone, we take that on, if we hear that, some people might just reject it, but if you take it on faith and you're like, okay, I get that, that can maybe do a little, but if you really look around your space and recognize that this is a projection, nothing that you are seeing right now actually exists the way that you think it exists right now. Literally, what you are seeing, no matter where you look, is a mental representation of something which you have no direct access to. And when you
Mhm.
really get that, everything looks, not that it looks weird and trippy and psychedelic, but you realize like this is just an ever-shifting visual display. Everything that you hear is an ever-changing auditory representation of something which is neither out there nor, a bird in a tree or a car driving along the street. It has nothing to do with that. And so the more we can like really become aware of these absolute foundations of what we think our life is and the way that the world is, the more it all starts to dissolve when you really become aware that, you know, this is just, um, yeah, it's a one fallible brain's projection of what it thinks the world is, and that includes everything from everything you see to everything you think about anything. It is all the brain's in very, very fallible, conditioned projection.
Right.
And that doesn't leave you a lot of room to stand on.
No.
So it really undercuts basically everything. And it kind of changes the way that you view everything in the world.
Well, and I've referred back to this before, and I will continue to refer to it in the future because it I think is a really excellent, succinct way of summing it up. There is no firmament.
No, nope,
There isn't any place to stand.
no, not at all. Not at all.
And at one point in time in my life, that probably would have been a horrifying thought, but
Yeah,
fortunately, the years have been kind, and that what has been sent my way are all things that express and reinforce that idea.
yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't mean that it's not, it doesn't mean that it's all comfortable. There are times where some of this stuff can lead to things that are, they're not entirely uncomfortable, but they're definitely not something that you would uh, necessarily choose if given that choice.
Mhm.
But the thing is that they're okay because they're recognized for what they are. They're just another gate to pass through on the path of the process of greater and greater freedom.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, taken for what they are, it's a welcome thing.
yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
it's again, it's the attitude that we bring towards it. It's the meaning that we put on it that makes it into, I'm grateful for this hardship because, or this difficulty, because I see something on the other side of it. That is a very beneficial posture to have towards it, in terms of, lessening the suffering that we endure when we're going through it. Which is why there is something to be said for people who wholeheartedly believe that, God has a plan and, everything works out for the best and, there's a reason for everything. And if you genuinely believe that, it can be very psychologically beneficial because,
oh yeah,
it
sure.
takes a lot of the stress off.
Absolutely.
The
But
problem.
and I don't even want to open up the can of worms, but there are obviously pitfalls there.
Well, that's the thing. It's, if you start to have the slightest doubt of faith, then the whole thing can come crashing down.
Yeah, I was gonna say the whole thing begins to unravel.
Yep. And that's where it becomes problematic. And that's why we put so much effort into, getting people to be equanimous without needing to rely on one of those beliefs just to feel okay.
Well, with that in mind, um, the idea, there's this thing that we hear that, and I may put this poorly, but that the crux of our stress and unhappiness, our suffering, to use a word that I think is beginning to possibly become, unfortunately, overused just because of its convenience and its accuracy. That the linchpin for all of that is the the idea of a fixed, consistent, reliable self.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an excerpt of one of our conversations that you had put up on YouTube in the last couple of weeks. And I'm sure you'll remember it. It's the one pertaining to free will.
I don't, but remind me.
Okay, well, I don't know if that, I don't know that I can accurately give you enough information. It was the idea of free will as a belief.
Hmm.
And for me, I've
Oh
listened to that
yeah.
a couple of
Yeah.
times. I have that saved under my reminders,
Nice.
and I've gone back to it a couple of times. And the reason is because not really the part about the free will and the belief, but what's central to that is the idea of someone who can have free will
Mhm.
or someone who doesn't have free will. And
Sure.
it's that someone in there that's the bug in all of that.
Yeah.
And so I've listened to that, and what it's done is it has returned the attention to the idea of, well, who is it that is that either thinks they do or doesn't have free will, or can act or has choice. And let me see if I can get this right because I'm kind of in the same place as you, although you may not know it. But the lack of sleep and the way
Yeah.
it's left me so jittery makes it hard to get to things sometime. I'm surprised I've done as well as I have.
You're doing surprisingly well. Yeah, yeah. You are
Yeah, I don't know
absolutely.
how that's happening, um, but maybe it's because I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
18, I've got 18 years of this kind of stuff.
yeah.
It's having a kid will make you give you a certain degree of facility in these conditions.
I can imagine. Yeah, yeah.
But trying to think of how to say this. Um, okay, we know that there was a point in time when there was a moment of seeing through the illusion of self.
Mm,
We've talked about that. I've
yep.
written about it. Um, and I don't doubt or question that.
Yeah.
But that experience, for everything that came with it, and for the fact that it has changed things and shifted things, it was not one of those experiences that you hear some people talk about where, in one moment, the whole thing was completely seen through in its entirety.
Mm,
The assumption of someone being here, the belief, the sense of it is completely erased. There's no sense of anyone at all. It's strictly a completely what's the word, impersonal
mm.
uh, observer, which I know it implies someone, but I don't. It's impossible with our language to get away from that. It
Yeah,
seems like.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so there's just this impersonal observation of things happening. Like, oh, that's a hand. Oh, that's a voice coming out of a mouth. That's talking.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, I do have that. That happens sometimes, especially if I put my attention on it. And sometimes it happens on its own.
yeah.
And there's definitely a sense, like I've told you before, if you turn off the lights in the room at night, there's just sort of this sense of, well, there's some sort of awareness here, but there's not a body. The boundaries are dissolved. It's just,
Yeah.
kind of uh, an awareness floating in space, floating in blackness.
Mm,
Um, anyway, all that to say is, sure, there is a shift, but that there's more that it seems like there's more that needs to be done there. And you said something to me last time we talked, I think it was about, when certain things come up, like something that imputes or implies someone who can do or have or know something, what does that point to? And
yeah.
that was the question you asked,
Yeah.
that you suggested. What does that point to? And so those two things have brought that back to the forefront.
Nice.
Okay. And
I see.
so, and I thought, well, it's really better to just focus on one thing because now I've got a couple of balls in the air here and I'm juggling. Thought, well, that's the linchpin. Let's go with that because if we can really see through what remains there, that will probably undo some of this Fetter 2 and Fetter 4.5 stuff. And so, like, okay, well, that seems reasonable. Let's do that. And so that's where the last 5 days or so, that's what's been happening.
Nice.
So when doing so, now here's the reason I'm even bringing this up. When doing so, when I look, something will happen, and there's this automatic assumption and a feeling of someone being there. Okay, so what the heck is that? And go to look,
Excellent.
and all I find is, well, there's sort of this sense of the attention, instead of the attention being out there, the attention
Mhm.
comes back here. And I
Mhm.
know we've had that conversation. It's not some idea that there's like the analogy or metaphor you used was yeah, analogy you used was like a flashlight,
Mm.
being beamed onto something. It's just that the rest of all of that out there kind of disappears, becomes soft focus. There's not as much awareness of it. The awareness is here,
Yeah.
and that awareness is on, okay, there's just that sense of the biological machinery idling,
Yeah.
metabolism and energy in the
Yep.
body, and that creates or is taken as someone.
Yeah.
The field of vision is a big one. That you take the field of vision and you attach that to that bodily sense,
Yep.
and then oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there are mental pictures. So you've got three things now that are all getting woven together to create a sense of someone here. And
Completely.
the thing is those mental pictures are incredibly subtle and incredibly
Yep.
sneaky. There are
Yep.
times where I'll look and I'll go, I'm not even sure there was. I think there was. Maybe there was. I'm not
Yep.
really sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay, well, so there are two.
Yep.
Um, and that's fine. I guess there is kind of a sense of vexation over that because, like, well, if I'm not sure it's there, then I'm not sure what really is creating the sense of self. And I feel like in order for this to really be effective, there needs to be clarity about what is actually happening in that moment to create a sense of someone here. And so that lack of clarity, like I said, there's a mild sense of vexation of, well, is there or isn't there a mental picture? So, but all I can do is just keep looking, and I do. And the answer to that is sometimes yes, sometimes no. So anyway, I think
Okay.
we've talked about this before. The issue in all of this is that when looking and seeing those two or three things, possibly sometimes more, things that constitute a sense of someoneness, there's there's this sense of um, something being overlooked. I've missed
Mhm.
something. There's something there that's happening that I am not quite getting, and that is always a sticking point because there's a sense of if I could just dig deeper, if I can look a little more
Mhm.
deeply, if I can get more clarity and see that, then this would become even more. I don't know, there would be to kind of refer back to some Zen language, there would be a greater penetration into this illusion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so how do we sum that up? I guess you sum it up by saying there is inquiry and there is, effort with regards to inquiry, but a feeling that somehow we're just falling short. Somehow we're overlooking something. Somehow there's
Mhm.
not quite the clarity needed. And that clarity, that finer seeing, um, it feels like that's part of what is hindering, really pulling the rug out from underneath that someoneness.
And it's so funny because I'm going to be really annoying right now. Uh,
Okay.
that feeling of effort itself is a large part of the self illusion,
God, you're right.
right? That
You're
is
right.
then where to turn to look.
That that's the thing that kills me is you see this stuff, and if I didn't have you, I would overlook this stuff, and it's maddening.
This is why it helps to talk to somebody too in our practice.
Sure.
But this is the thing is that, and I'm also going to be, all right. So blanket statement to anybody watching. Obviously, having really good clarity like of what you described is super helpful. It is really useful, especially when we're starting with all of this stuff, to have a good sense of sensory clarity, what is happening in each of the sense fields, what's happening in the mind, what's happening out there, what am I feeling in the body. All of that is super important.
Right.
It sounds to me, though, like your quest for clarity is itself reinforcing the self illusion. You're at the point because you keep having that feeling that I must be missing something else. There must be something else. There's this idea that there is like some level of clarity where you are going to see something which has never been seen before, which has been the culprit to the illusion. But the fact is, the illusion is made of so many different parts. And I suspect, because, it's where neuroscience is at the moment anyway, a large part of it is coming from the prefrontal cortex and, default mode in general. But the actual functional creation of the sense of self is happening in the brain and is not something that you will ever have direct access to. You can't.
Repeat that sentence, please.
Yeah, the creation of the sense of self is happening by certain regions in the brain, and it is not something that you will ever have direct access to knowing. You
Okay.
can't directly experience your, medial prefrontal cortex turning on and giving a signal to you just can't have that level of discernment, right? It's beyond human capability to know. The only reason we know that we even have a brain is because people have either cut open the skull or done, imaging that can show, oh, well, when you're doing this activity, there's more blood flow or electricity here and blah, blah, blah. So for those of us who don't have, multi-million dollar scanning equipment in our bedroom, we have to deal with what we actually have in our direct experience. And so for that, the sort of best approximation that we can get is to notice the parts of our experience which you just, laid out really well, that you have certain sensations in the body, certain mental images, other different types of thoughts that all collaborate together. And the whole point is those things exist, but they do not actually create the self. They create the illusion of there being some other higher order thing which comes about because of their existence. What I hear is that you're still looking for something which is effectively the self. Like, there's not a self, but you're looking for that one more thing which is going to be the actual self.
Well, let me qualify and clarify that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not looking for the self, but it's looking for that part of your experience that is the sort of the cornerstone to the illusion of self.
Yeah. But the illusion of self doesn't have a single cornerstone. It has
Uh,
multiple ever-changing patterns of thought and sensation.
God, you're right.
And the whole point is to recognize that there is no stable cornerstone of the self there to be found. Everywhere you look for the self, it is always a changing panorama of sensations and thoughts, and there is no stable center to any of it.
I'm so glad I asked you about this because I
It's-
really was I really was um, I really was wrapping myself up in what were those things? Straitjacket. I,
yeah,
I really was just
yeah,
putting myself in a straitjacket.
yeah. And that is the same sense of self that you're looking at that creates that feeling of, oh, I need to do this more. I need to effort in this direction. I'm not succeeding. I'm not fulfilling the task. And that is just another line of thought. And why I say then turn toward that is because you can recognize there is something that feels selfy in that. So then notice it's not to find the cornerstone in that, but it's to find the selfing that's happening in that action.
Okay, hang on a minute. Did you say find the selfing that's happening in that action?
Yeah, there's like a feeling of personal identification, a feeling of meanness, which is involved in that idea that I need to just find that one last little part of the self to,
Okay.
right? That
Now,
itself is part of it.
which part of it?
That itself is part of the illusion. It's not there all the time, right? Because you can feel like a self even when you're not efforting.
Right.
But when you're efforting, you almost always feel like a self. So you know that um there is something about that feeling which has a selfie kind of nature to it. But it's odd because it's not it's not completely dependent upon the feeling of efforting to have that sense of self. So that's coming about with other things too. And again, from the neuroscience perspective, I mean, it's quite simply that there are regions of the brain which attribute a sense of personal meaning to things. It takes, a dog barking out there and it says, well, how does that reflect on me? How does that dog barking relate to me? And all of a sudden it feels personal. So the interesting thing is to start to question what it actually means for something to feel personal, because that's not like an inherent part of the experience. And it's one of those things, just like anxiety or fear or happiness, that we take. If I say like it feels personal, you just assume you know what I mean by it feels personal. It's one of those things that is like the something that we just don't realize we should be curious about and investigating, because it's not as simple as just being a foundational part of experience.
So, is it possible to develop or cultivate inquiry in such a way that we can manage to quit getting fooled by that thing that I just described, where you're doing inquiry, you're looking for what are the parts of this fundamental illusion without getting trapped by or fooled by, hoodwinked by um, something that is a part of the inquiry that is generating or somehow creating a sense of self. In other words, is it possible to do inquiry in such a way where I can see, I can learn to see for myself the kinds of things that I just described to you? Do we ever get to a point where we can quit getting fooled by that?
I would say yeah, yeah, and it's that matter of noting, like it's the old Buddhist story about how the Buddha had a, I think it was supposed to be originally it was a vina player or a lute player or something, where like you said, with your practice, it can't be too tight or too loose, just like the string of a vina. And so you
Mhm.
have to find that balance in your practice, that if it feels like you're efforting too much, if you can become aware now that when you feel that sense of efforting, that is uh, contributing to that feeling of self. So then step back. What happens when you do that relaxation, when you just relax into the practice? Is you're still aware, you're still curious, but without that sense of direct, I need to find or I need to do it correctly feeling. And it's our biology is so fascinating. I mean, like when we're concerned about something, when we're fearful about something, when we're efforting on something, we tend to have this very like narrow focused view. Like with our eyes, we tend to get very central. And like you mentioned, we tend to feel more, the sensations in the core of the body, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But it's a funny thing, just focusing on the peripheral vision instead of the foveal vision directly in the middle
Mhm.
actually reduces the activation of the amygdala. So when you are feeling like stressed or, fearful about something, just widening out, you can feel the
Ah,
change physically in the body. That all of
I
a sudden you
remember
feel
that.
less fearful, less stressed.
Yeah, I remember Chuladasa talking about that in his book.
Amazing.
I
So,
forget, he had all that specialized language around it, but that was the
yeah,
gist of it, was to widen up and take in as fully as possible the peripheral view.
exactly. And I recommend that all the times. I have a whole thing actually in the book that I'm writing. I talk about that a lot because it is so beneficial, because that alone, that feeling of moving attention out to the periphery weakens that sense of self so much. So if you feel like you're doing the inquiry and you're getting too engaged in selfing in the inquiry, widen out. Feel the periphery of the body, notice the periphery of the vision, and start to find what feels like the difference. Do you feel something actually starts to unwind and feel less centralized and less selfy, that's a good clue as to what that self illusion was being made of at that point. And you can actually practice going back and forth between peripheral view and central view, peripheral view and central view, and feel that sense of contraction that happens that gets associated with the self. But it's not,
Wow.
right? You're just feeling contraction and now you're feeling relaxation. An assumption is happening about that, which is saying, oh, but now I'm present and I am actively engaged and now I am relaxed and I am spacious. No, hold on. Not the
So
way.
we've got three things then. One is if you're exerting yourself, if there's exertion,
Yeah.
then that's a red flag that there's
Mhm.
selfing going on, and that's whatever, however that shows up, that's reinforcing the self illusion.
It is.
Um, then if you can, if you go to taking in peripheral view as fully as possible, and that relaxes that and diminishes that sense of self, that's an indicator for you that yes, that's exactly what was happening. You were exerting yourself, it was generating something that contributes to that illusion, and so that's an antidote is to widen the perspective.
Exactly.
And now I don't remember what the third thing is. So,
Well, that you can actually use that. That was a great summation. That you can actually use that practicing back and forth between going wide and that to notice that the feeling itself that changes, what specifically changes, and take note that that difference is what is being attributed to the sense of self.
whoa, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
So let me see if I got that right.
Right.
So you widen the perspective,
Yep.
take it peripheral vision, then come
Feel
back to
how everything
central
is.
view. You
Yep.
shift back and forth.
Yep.
Notice the change.
Yeah.
Then that change that you feel in the body, and that's where I get lost.
Well, that's a major contributor to that illusion of self. That
Okay.
if I don't feel like a self when I'm out here, or it feels way turned down anyway, the feeling of selfing when I'm out here, and then all of a sudden I focus in and I feel very intently like myself. That is super, super interesting. Where exactly do you feel that difference happening? Is it that you're feeling more sensations down the central channel of the body? Is it something to do with the widening of focus itself that gives you that impression that now I am present and focused and intent? That, all of a sudden, there was no or very little sense of Todd out here, but Todd really comes in when I'm here. Being aware of that change in all the different ways that it shows up for you, and it's going to be, primarily a little bit different for everybody,
Hmm.
but just notice that and be aware that that means that it doesn't really exist, right? That the self doesn't really exist because it's malleable and it is constantly changing. It's here, it's there, it's not here, it's there. And it's something that can be turned on as easily as widening and narrowing the sense of focus. And, especially when we're doing this stuff with like first Fetter version of the self and all of that, it's hard to know when we hear other people talk what their actual experience is regarding it, like you used the phrase before about when people say that they've, see through the entire thing and there's no sense of self, the whole thing has been what I think is the most important takeaway when we're doing this work is not that feeling that all of the attributes of what we normally took to be a self, we don't need for those to never come back online again, because that is just part of biological functioning.
I see.
It's the belief, the assumption, that unquestioned assumption that all of those added up to a real self with all of the beliefs and stories that I have about the self. That was believed to be real. We can very clearly now see that it's not. But it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that all of a sudden you can't, feel sensations in the body that are different when they're out there and narrow in here. It's literally the amygdala turning, down or amping up in some cases. It's literally biology that is changing depending on what we're thinking about. It's literally parts of the prefrontal cortex which are making life seem personal. Whether the practice is actually, you know, uh, down regulating some of those in a more permanent sense. That could be, for some people, it does seem that that's the case. The default mode network gets turned down in general. For uh, a lot of what we're doing is building up these kind of other network processes where instead of being immediately overtaken by, anxiety, for instance, like the default mode network tends to like chime in with suggestions about things. Like I actually have a section in the book that where I talk about like if you start to feel like fluttering in the chest or or increased heartbeat, parts of the default mode network are basically what kick in to say, oh, but I might be having a heart attack. Maybe I'm, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And it makes it very personal and kind of frantic and do something about it. And there are other regions of the brain which are taking note of what's there. Like the insula is always aware of what's going on in the body. And your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex has it's kind of like the sort of dutiful, overseer of things. It's like the one that kind of keeps you on task and does all that sort of thing. But when we get into like um, spirals of anxiety and stuff, it basically it doesn't have the effect that it used to have. It doesn't get activated like it used to. It doesn't have the power
Right.
that it once did to kind of
Yeah.
regulate things. And so what we're actually doing with the practice is to when we have like the whole meta awareness thing that we talk about being able to kind of be aware of what's going on in thoughts, but not getting immediately sucked into them, being aware of heart beating in the body without immediately getting sucked into, oh, but I think I'm having a heart attack and now I'm having, or maybe I'm having a panic attack and then, I got to do something. All of that is happening because we're basically strengthening different neural networks that are allowing us to have some sense of perspective that isn't immediately allowing the default mode network to take over and to make everything personal and deeply terrifying experience where it's dire and I got to do something about it right away because it's me, my life that's on the line. Helpful, but not always. And so we're
Right.
we're literally strengthening other parts. They can say, okay, but you were just running for a half hour. Your heart rate is probably up because you've just been exercising. It's okay. You can relax. Like having a greater awareness about what's going on, like you said with George Carlin, about being aware of things, but not being like really invested in it.
Right.
It's having that kind of relationship to everything that's going on in the mind and body. It's aware of it, but it's less engaged. And I think it's a long process for most of us. It's not something that happens just because we see the sense of self as, oh, I get it. There is no central sense of self there. Wow. You still have a lot of processing and a lot of conditioning that's going on that needs to be worked over the course of
Right. There's a lot of
probably.
reconditioning has to happen.
Exactly.
Well, you know, I don't know if you've ever looked, actually opened up or looked at a copy of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, but
Mm-mm.
there's a lot of stuff in there. I had a friend the first handful of years that I got sober until he moved away. But for the first 5 or 6 years, there was a guy I was really close with, and there's conversation where he pointed out, these guys were saying things in this book about spiritual awakening and the nature of self and all of this. He said, I don't even think they realized what they were saying and the depth of it. And one of the great things I took away from that book was they talk about how occasionally somebody will have a spiritual awakening and it just all happens for them just all at once, poof, and everything changes. And the problem of drink just is alleviated and it's in a moment it's gone. But what they went on to say was that, but for most of us, our spiritual awakening is of the educational variety.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great phrase for this, the educational variety, because it goes back to something I once said to a monk. I asked him about awakening. I said, so awakening is, and this was based on what he was saying to me. He was saying, I forget what he was saying, but as he said this to me, I stopped and I said, so awakening is fundamentally and at its essence neurological. He said, he laughed. He said, yeah, what else could it be?
That's amazing.
You
Well, I
know,
love that. Yep. Yep. I think that's yeah. I mean, it is a bit of a difference depending on your tradition. I think Buddhists tend to nowadays default more to the neurological side of things
Yeah.
because like even I mean the Dalai Lama is very fond of science and has so I think a lot of the different traditions have kind of gone that way. And because Buddhism has been so adamant about there being no self in any regard, and there's no, so I think, Hinduism and the Advaita traditions and stuff do tend to retain more of like a spiritual essence in that regard.
Yeah.
And so there can be some conflicts there. But yeah, yeah. So coming from the Buddhist tradition myself, it just seems to confirm, my experience as well as, or maybe my experience confirms my, background, which is also just as likely. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it just seems to track a lot better. And then the more that our understanding of neuroscience deepens, and the more that seems to just reinforce all the stuff that the Buddhist practice has basically been pointing to for thousands of years. That's also very
Yeah.
helpful. So,
Yeah. And I mean, we'll never know. Some people might really be bothered by this idea, but I suspect if Siddhartha Gautama was here today, if he was alive today, and we brought him up to speed, he'd go, "Yeah, yeah, I think you
yeah,
guys got it."
yeah, I would hope so. I would think that's probably the case. Because he was, well, again, it depends on the traditions and the way that things have been kind of uh, interpreted and framed, but he generally speaking, he really didn't leave a lot of room for the the spiritual side of things, that sort of
Uh,
soul essence or special self nature.
right.
Most of the inquiries are basically there to say, where could this possibly be? And um and I know some of the traditions are kind of, you know, because it basically came out of a reaction against Hinduism at the time. There are things that are, some of the schools are openly contradictory and challenging towards, the tenets of the day. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating. I think the anytime we start to get deeper into those things where it's like all the different schools of Buddhism that are writing not I think that's one of the things that was kind of a disillusioning factor for me within Buddhism is that um, there are different schools of Buddhism where what was being written as effectively as truths were being written to contradict or to discredit other schools of Buddhism that taught opposite things. And
Yeah.
so it's not that it's necessarily being derived from their direct personal experience. It's,
Hmm.
it's not saying this is necessarily true in some ultimate fashion, but it's becomes actually like a almost like a theoretical or pedagogical kind of a difference of where, yes, but our group teaches it in this way differently from, your group. And so you must be wrong because, and then it just becomes like uh um like philosophy that's just sort of theoretical philosophy. It has nothing to do with their actual experience of what they have come to realize themselves. And I find that disconcerting, kind of concerning from the perspective of a tradition which is a deeply um, personally guided tradition. It's like I always saw Buddhism as like a toolbox of here are things that you can use. These are some basic pointers to look. Have at it. Be a light unto yourself. Have the experience. Find out for yourself whether it's true or not. I love the Buddha is always credited as saying, like be a scientist or be um, don't take anything for granted. Don't take anything on faith just because I said it. Test it out. Be rigorous. Find out if it's true for you, and then only then, go with it. And so all of that was really my go-to when I came to Buddhism. And then having, found out later in life about how much of it was just sort of warring schools of Buddhist thought and we're taking like digs in the sutras about other other schools or that sort of thing. I find that really disappointing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Although I think that's why, even though for a long time I got very interested in Theravadan Buddhism, that's why I find myself going back to where I started, which was Zen, because even
Mm.
though they have, what is it, the I can't remember the different sects of,
Soto and Rinzai and
yeah,
yeah. Um,
they still, there seems to be much less of that with the Zen tradition than the other, the Theravadan and the Tibetan
yeah,
schools.
yeah,
Uh,
I agree.
um, so the other thing that I wanted to bring up was, um, and I'm not sure, it seems like this is more about how um, how this is dealt with, how this is worked with, is that this last week has been it's been an interesting week. I mean, first we got snow and ice dumped on us, and everyone was just completely, unless you were somebody who's from up north and really knows how to deal with snow and ice, or you're just out of your mind, everyone was staying put.
Yeah, yeah.
In our case, we have a driveway that's at about a 30-35 degree angle. So
Oh,
first you
that's
got
a
to get
problem.
down it, then you got to get back up it.
That doesn't go so well.
Yeah,
No.
so it's like, yeah, when until it melts, we're here.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Getting down is easy. Getting back up is a little harder.
well, getting down is not that easy either, because if somebody's decided to park their car out there and you go sliding down, you may
It's
not
not
stop until
it's
you've,
it's not safe, but it's easy. You can just push and slide. It's just doing it
yeah,
in a safe way that's difficult.
I'd say easy-ish. Because you could slide, clear across this, go down the driveway, try to put on your brakes, and you're sliding until you're in the over the curb and in the neighbor's yard.
Completely. Yeah.
But at any rate, then I'm trying to think of how to put this as simply as possible. So Tuesday has been choosing to do things that, because of her boyfriend,
Mm,
that have led to, and I'll just, without getting into the whole can of worms, I'll just say in just a single word, cannabis.
okay.
And we all know how that is such a breeding ground for anxiety, really serious anxiety.
It really can be.
And she already is kind of inclined that way because Susanna that's something she's worked with over the years. Although she she knows how to work with it. She's managed it, and it's not something that consumes her. It's just something that comes up and she deals with. But Tuesday, for a variety of reasons, has got that tendency or temperament.
Yeah.
And so and this has been going on almost daily for a while, and then suddenly she got the plug pulled on it, and I think that's even made it worse. And so she's been really anxious, and what wound up happening as a result was, without getting into all the details and the whole wacky tale, um, it's time to go to bed. We're getting ready for bed, or Susanna and I are in bed, and we're talking, or maybe we're watching something, and then Tuesday comes in,
Mm,
and there have been several nights this week where, for reasons that are too complicated to go into, what winds up happening is I wind up sleeping here in the computer room.
mm.
And all that to say is that has set off, this is, welcome to Fetter too. This is all, it's stimulating or activating things that have either happened in our family in the last 5 years, or really actually has its roots going back even further, because the way things looked in our family was, it got to a point where our family was, it seems, at least in my mind, was represented by my mom and my younger sister,
Mm,
because my dad was so passive and just was kind of checked out on it, and I understand why.
mm.
If I'd married my mom, I would have been checked out on it too. um, which, God, that's a completely weird sentence to have said. But anyway, um, and so there's a mirroring of that, or has been. There's not now, but in the past there was a mirroring of that mom and younger sister thing with Susanna and my daughter.
Yeah.
And so that brought up all kinds of stuff. And for the most part, I- I'm reminded of what the Buddha said about needing to have the energy to practice,
Mm.
because I think the sleep deprivation interfered with that. And so
Yep.
really found it difficult, if not impossible, to get to that. Um, and when I did, I really couldn't get any traction. But then a few nights, it's been the last 48 hours. Finally, when this came up, I was able to really respond effectively. And there was a feeling, there were the feelings, stop. Okay, so feeling it in the body. And it's interesting because the instant as soon as I took the attention and put it on the sensation of the body, it was like something was loudly announcing, this is your mom and your younger sister. This is
Mhm.
being rejected by what was the representation of the family.
Yeah.
This was being made an outcast in your own family, such as it was. And it was a body thing. I mean, there wasn't anything to think. I mean, it was felt so clearly and sharply in the body. There was no doubt that this nonverbal voice informing me of that was spot on.
Mm.
And so, I was able to remember, okay, so some of the things you've told me, is this happening right now? Look around and see, are you being rejected? Are you being made an outsider?
Yep.
Hold on a minute. Talking about it has reactivated it.
It's okay.
Yeah, I don't have any shame or
Yeah.
reluctance around crying. It's just I'm not going to be able to talk if I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hang on a second. Um,
Okay.
and I'm not trying to suppress it or ignore it.
I
It's
know.
just I worked with this, and sure, I know
Yeah.
it needs to be worked with again, but now is probably not the most ideal time. Hang on.
It's okay. It's okay. Let it go. It's okay.
So that that kind of derailed the train of thought. Let me see if I can
It's okay.
reconnect with
Well,
that.
well, let me ask, while
Sure,
we're there. So,
sure.
are there any thoughts when this is happening? Is this just purely, physical? Is it like you touch a button and then just crying happens?
Pretty much. I mean, there's a little bit of mental activity, but it's not a case of there's a thought and then that happens. It's just I was telling you about it and it kind of reconnected back to that.
Yeah.
And once that connection was made, then there it is. Out it comes.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean,
Yeah,
it can also be that, you probably have many years of this that's being held on to, suppressed, not
right.
really adequately let out. And there's, something to be said for having that freedom to just allow the process to play out.
Well, that answers that was part of what I was wondering about because, like I said, I was, you know, stopped what I was doing, went to the feelings in the body, heard that indicator, I mean, that felt somehow sensed the indicator of what this was, and then went to. And it's interesting because when it happened the first time, there wasn't as much of a bodily inclination towards crying and releasing like there was just now. Um, and that I'm kind of curious about that, but I'll set that aside for a moment and say that um, I looked around. Am I being rejected? Am I being made the outcast in my family? And no, no, I really wasn't, because that's Susanna didn't want it, but she didn't know how to deal with the situation without just completely cutting Tuesday off.
Yeah.
And yeah, Tuesday's 18. And there are those people that say, well, she's 18. She just needs to deal with that. She's old enough now. She just needs to deal with it. It's not quite that black and white for
Yeah.
a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that she's on the spectrum. And yeah, really high functioning, very high functioning, but those neurological that neurological part of, or that neurological foundation for it is still very much there, and it
Yeah,
and it can be
absolutely.
seen at times, sometimes more than others. um, so Susanna was in a difficult position. She wanted to make sure that she didn't just coldly throw Tuesday out into the cold. Weird sentence again.
Yeah.
She didn't want to just completely, leave her to her own when she doesn't know how to deal with anxiety.
Mm.
So
Mm. Too
yeah,
powerful.
I slept here. I slept in this room 3 nights in the last week. But it wasn't because I was rejected. It wasn't because the two of them were managing, however unintentionally recapitulating, my life and my family growing up. Um, and that was helpful. It was helpful
Mm.
to see all of that. And it's real easy to lose sight of the fact that you don't just do that once. You
No.
have to do that again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
Um, the hard thing about inquiry is remembering to do it.
Truth.
And what's doubly hard about inquiry is remembering to do it, but also there are times where something happens. It's a daily occurrence, and this isn't a complaint. This is just an objective recognition of this is what life is like right now. Multiple times a day, things will happen, and the next thing I know, I've got five things of which none of them really can wait. None of
Hmm.
them can be put off till later. I've got to deal with all of them now or shortly. And um, in those moments, it's not unusual for me to be in one of those moments, and I'm doing my best to really keep the attention on the bodily sensations. And that's more often than not, it seems like that's as much as I can do. But that's frustrating because each one of those is a golden opportunity, and I don't want to. Okay, I remembered to do it, for crying out loud. I don't want to lose that because I may not remember it for a few more hours,
Yeah.
or I may not
Yeah.
remember it until that evening. So here it is, it's now, and I want to work with it. But the best I can do is to just pay attention to the bodily sensation. I can't go further with it. Okay, so what do these feelings remind you of? Where does this seem to be coming from? What does it seem to be saying? And then working with that. All of that, it winds up having to wait until later, assuming I remember to. When I do, by the time later comes, I try to revisit and recall what's going on in that moment, how it felt, what the thoughts were. But more often than not, it's such a faint representation of it that it really isn't terribly useful.
Yeah. A couple things in there. You know, for one thing, I think having that positive reinforcement is a good way of going about this too. So if you get frustrated with not being able to stay with it long enough or having forgotten or whatever else,
Mhm.
that's not really uh, giving you the positive
Ah,
likelihood of doing it again, right? You're teaching yourself that if you don't do it right or the right time, you're gonna effectively punish yourself. It's not like but it's coming from that same place.
instead, it needs to be the hooray, I remember
Yeah,
to do it.
I did it.
Fantastic. Yeah.
exactly, because that's going to be much stronger, the opposite of a deterrent. Can't think of the word, but as you know,
Reinforcement?
reinforcement, yeah, that you're going to have
What
that,
is it?
yeah, that you're going to do it again in the future. And if you don't, it's still, okay, there will be other options, other opportunities, I mean,
Yeah, and there always
that will
are.
come, right? They're always going to come. Also notice when it's there, if you have that negative, you know, reinforcement kind of thing come up, that
Mm.
is your it's another iteration of that same selfing that we talked about regarding the use of effort. So that idea that, oh,
Oh,
I passed it up, I can't do that. That is that same moment of feeling of effort that we talked about with the first Fetter inquiry a little while ago.
okay. Hold on a minute. I want to be clear on that.
Yeah,
So we're saying that in those moments when there's the sense of I've got to get this right now. If I don't get it right
yeah,
now, that is more of the exertion that indicates a sense of self. So far, so good.
exactly. Yes.
Okay. So what do we do with that when we see that exertion creating the sense of someone? What do we do with that in that moment?
Well, if we really want to be OCD about things, we can literally use every moment for inquiry because the second that you realize that you forgot to do inquiry a moment ago, but now you're feeling guilty about not having done the inquiry, you can do inquiry on guilt. Or if you feel that you are, I need to get this, and you have that moment of feeling exertion, you can turn it around and recognize that as a perfect moment to feel into what it is, like we talked about earlier, that feels like it's the one doing the efforting, or that's going to get something out of the efforting, or what the linchpin supposedly is in that moment that actually feels like the self who's doing it. That's why I say, like, literally any moment could be a moment for inquiry because there is always something there to look into, depending on what's happening. So whether you remember to inquire and then you feel self-congratulatory about having remembered, you could always inquire into the self-congratulatory nature of it. Who just succeeded? Who got applauded? Who got rewarded? There is literally always, because our layers of identification are so deeply nested and so many layers on top of each other. There's always something that we can look into. So to get up, you know on our case about not having done it perfectly in one way or having missed an instant, that in itself creates another instant that you can inquire into. So there's nothing lost here. It's simply a shift of perspective.
Hmm.
And again, having the positive reinforcement will make it more likely that that habit is more likely to continue again. But I also want to say that regarding this more deeply past traumatic side of things, there is also something to be said for just really allowing the body to emote, to having that moment where when you think about something and you just get that urge to cry, instead of immediately inquiring into it in that regard, it can be really deeply therapeutic to go into it and just allow the crying to happen. You don't have to make stories about it or any of that,
Right.
but it's like a biological response that has been left, kind of repressed for a long
Hmm.
time. And so going
Right.
into that response and just allowing the body to do what it needs to do, and that can also be, it can be crying, it can be, screaming into a pillow, or stomping on the ground or shaking the limbs, or whatever you need to do. If there's something in there, there's no problem with doing that. Do it mindfully, allow it, being aware of what's happening. Don't make big self-narrative stories about it, but allow it to play out, because there's
Okay.
there's there's no there's no inherent self in that crying. There's nothing wrong with that crying happening. There's more like sort of repressive self nature or selfing on the let me rephrase that. There's more selfing happening when you repress the crying or the movement or
Uh,
whatever, because it's been conditioned into you that you're not supposed to just start crying when something moves you. You're supposed to man up and hold it together and whatever,
Oh,
or
I don't buy
that
that crap.
good. But, a lot of us have that kind of thing built in, or just that, it's not appropriate to cry in every circumstance that the emotion comes up. Hold it for later, or that, it's not appropriate to shake the arms or do what, you need to do to, like, Pernilla always talks about, you can see if a dog gets scared, they get scared and then
Yeah, they
shake and then it's
shake.
gone. We have been conditioned by society to not do that. It's still part of our nature to
Hmm.
dissipate that extra energy in there, but we're taught not to do that. So there are a lot of things that you can just recognize. This isn't necessarily part of your nature. This isn't how it should be. It's just your conditioning that has said that, well, you're not supposed to cry right now, or you're not supposed to, scream into a pillow, or I'm not supposed to, because people will frown on that. This is your opportunity to question those things as well. Is it true? Is it okay if I actually just let go and cry? What happens? Oh, it feels actually quite good. All right, well, there you go. I know somebody who I had worked with for a bit, and they went through a period of just crying, like long stretches of crying, and then got to the point where they're like, okay, enough is enough. And then and they stopped. They felt like it was just dragging them into, too deep of a pit. And then I spoke to them recently and they've gone back to crying again and said it's actually like, there's just so much there that they really just need to allow it to happen. So yeah.
Yeah, I have absolutely no qualms with it. If anything, that's one of the few good things that came out of the way I was raised was that that idea was the idea was reinforced that it's perfectly okay to cry and perfectly
That's right.
healthy and nothing wrong with it and you should. When when that first initial concentrated um, work regarding Fetter 2 when that when that and the primary starting point was uncovered. Um, it was like that for months and months where
Mm.
I was crying all the time regularly. And yeah, I don't have any problem with it. If anything, between you and I, it's not a problem. I
Yeah.
think the only place where there comes into some hesitancy is something, and I talk about inquiry, there's something there that balks at putting it out in a really just hugely public way for anyone to to consume.
Yeah.
So, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. It's just a conditioned idea that this is personal and
Mhm.
somewhat private. Again, between you and I, not a problem. In the house, not a problem. But for all of these people I've never seen and might not, it probably will never meet. Um, that's a fairly new idea for a human being to begin with, and so it,
Yeah.
it does kind of create a sense of um, I'm not even sure what the word is for it, but there's this sort of just kind of stopping short at that
Mhm.
point. So,
Do you
but I guess
want
ultimately it doesn't matter.
Well, but do you want me to cut out that?
Nah,
You
don't
sure?
worry about it. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure. I'm sure. There was the way that felt and the kind of
Mhm.
sense about it initially on the other side of it. Whatever, you know. I mean,
If you change your mind in the next days, let me know.
yeah, I really I'm fine with it. It's one of those things that if somebody wanted to use that as a means to poke fun at me or try to be nasty and like like we've said, and what you and Pernilla have been saying, and I have really learned, um, it's something that's more deeply understood than when the ideas were first presented. That's about them. That has nothing to do with me.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that.
So, and I really feel that way. I mean, I can see that and I can feel that,
Yeah.
knock yourself out if that's what you need to do. It was just I had to get over that initial reluctance just because of the fact that well, this is new and weird.
I
Never,
know.
never been able to record something and make sure that, immediately, upon uploading it, that's immediately available to billions of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Okay. I know we are in very new times.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is, it's like, as far as we know, I don't know. I mean, you read people like Graham Hancock or Randall Carlson, and you go, well, I wouldn't be so sure about that statement, but supposedly, as far as we know, this is an absolute first for the human species ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a we're living a wild experiment.
hmm So I want to make sure I'm clear on that. So in those moments where there's a lot going on and you recognize that there's a feeling in the body and put the attention on that, and that's about as much as that can be done. Well, if there's that sense of any kind of exertion around that, then that's a point that's the point to ask, okay, well, who is it that's having the bodily sensation, or
Yeah.
any question of that sort that I can come up with.
Exactly. And even if it's not a question that's verbalizable like that, you just
hmm
turn attention to what it feels like to feel like you are exerting effort.
Hmm.
What does that there's a sort of a hallmark of that experience of feeling like we're exerting effort or I have to do this. And we can, say the phrase, but the phrase is pointing back to something that's felt in the body. And it's something that's being represented in some way in the mind, the I who has to do this thing. So even without necessarily making a statement, a question about it, or a direction like that, if you feel like I need to do this inquiry, turn it around to feel and to check in with the mental space to find what is that one supposed to be? Who is that one that's supposed to be? Even without questioning it, just being observant
I'm not sure
about,
if I understand the question when you
yeah,
say, what is that one supposed to be?
yeah,
Clarify that idea that
yeah. There's
with
there's an
inquiry.
idea that there is the one who is doing the inquiry, that Darrell
Okay.
is going to do the inquiry. So in that moment, the Darrell who can, tighten the reins and do the inquiry or just say screw it and go grab a snack, there is a feeling of something there which has that agency. And so it's in that moment to turn the spotlight around so that you can, okay, well, there's, tension in the chest. And I noticed there's squinting around the eyes and there's some tightness in the jaw. And there is that mental image of me doing a thing and there is, or however that's showing up. And just basically being so aware of what is there that seems to be part of that feeling of efforting because there are it's like if you're feeling like okay, say you go to a concert and it's like your favorite band and they call you up on stage and you're having this like amazing elational moment of like meeting your favorite musician and they call you up on stage and all of that. That is one form of selfing that is going to be experienced in that moment, right? There will be something that feels like the self who got picked to have this amazing experience and who is living at the time of their life and they, relate to this other person who they idolize and they, blah, 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 all of that goes on. Then there's another type of selfing that goes on when you are, oh, but I need to do this thing right and I need to inquire in the right way and find this. That feeling of self is different than being on stage with your favorite artist feeling of self. And your feeling of self when Susanna says, I love you. I'm so glad that, I'm with you. Whatever, that feeling of selfing is different from so each one is a different iteration of sensations that still get imbued with that same idea that this is me and my life and a self experience.
So what you're saying then is inquire into how does that selfing show up? What are the
Yeah,
components of that particular variety of selfing?
exactly. Because it's not the same in every given situation. There will be
Right.
similarities between every time that you're efforting or feeling like you're on the spot, or every time that you're feeling depressed and, self-morbid, or every time that you're, being told that you're super good at doing this thing and you've done a great job and you feel really positive and self-congratulatory. Each of those feels different from the other, but there are going to be similarities between each one of those, type category of selfing situations. And we're basically being aware of, well, why does the feeling of somebody saying you've done a really good job feel self-referential? Why does that feel like it's about me? Why does somebody saying, you need to do a better job next time you really failed feel like it's about me? And why does that feel personal? Being like, I remember, um, there was a period a few years ago, I guess now, when I was volunteering at this thing, and they had asked me to uh, reorganize their. It was like a food shop pantry thing, and they had asked me to reorganize the thing, and so I got like really into it, and I was like having a good time like reorganizing everything. So it was, and afterwards they gave me a really nice compliment about how good job I did, but it didn't feel like I had been doing a lot of the like or had done a lot of the 4 or 5 work before then, and it was just like it was nice that they said it, but it didn't feel like it was hitting anything in particular personal. It was like, that's lovely, but it doesn't ring true in the way that it would have, or felt personal in a way that it would have had I not done so much of the work before then. It just,
Well,
yeah. So that's what we're looking for, is like, where is this feeling of self located in each of these different situations?
it's a good one. Hang on a minute. The way you said that, you said something like it didn't hit on anything in particular. You managed to use language that describes something that happens to me at times, and I'll try to articulate it. I'll try to express it to Susanna, and I can never find the words for it when there's something that'll happen, and there's some kind of vague or indistinct response or reaction, but it doesn't have the really central, solid, can point to it quality that it would have had a year or 2 years ago or however long ago. So
Exactly.
I liked it when you said that. That's a good way to describe it. It doesn't hit anything in particular.
Yeah. It just kind
Um,
of passes through.
yeah, and there might be some kind of response or reaction, but it's not as really solid and clear and distinct as it once would have been.
Yeah, no, yeah. And it's good to notice then when somebody criticizes you or something like that, if that hits in a way that the praise doesn't, well, then there's something there for you to look into. Or vice versa for some people. Maybe blame doesn't do anything to you, but if somebody praises you or says something nice about you, that you can't hold it. It just feels okay. Well, there's something for you to work with then. It's all turning it around to find out then, you know, why is this particular issue something for me and yeah, why does that create that sense of the self who is one way or another?
Well, you said something that reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you, and it doesn't have to be a really long thing. I don't see why it needs to
Yeah.
be, but let me
Okay.
see if I can find where was uh here it is. I stumbled into a website from Christiana Mickelberger that I didn't
Oh,
even know
okay.
existed. Um, I mean, I've seen other websites of hers, but this one, I don't know if it's new or if yeah, it has to be new because it was updated recently. But
Cool.
she said, or I think she wrote it. It didn't say who because she has other people who work with her as guides. But
Mm,
she said something about the title though is After Desire and Aversion, and
mm,
she said, let me see. Make sure I'm seeing the right thing. Yeah, she says it's just this one little sentence. She says, after desire and aversion fall away.
Mm,
And when I read that, I kind of stopped because, again, we were talking just a little bit ago about the educational variety, and that seems to
yeah.
be how it is for the vast majority of people. And even that, I'm sure occurs on some kind of spectrum. But after desire and aversion fall away, that sounds so final, complete, and well, I don't know how to say it. It sounds so final and complete. I mean, it's like there's nothing else that can or needs to be done here. And so when I saw that and it hit me that way, that was the first thing that I thought that I wanted to ask you. Like,
Mm.
is that really ever how it is for most of us when it comes to work around 4 and 5?
Such a good question. And it's one of those where it's really hard to say. mm, Everybody has their own way of phrasing things, and they have their own experiences of what they mean when they phrase things a certain way.
Sure.
And so it's a little bit difficult to say for sure what anybody experiences. I can say personally, what I experienced from doing all of that work is that I went from really, feeling like if I was craving something, that was like something I really had to have and or fight against, and it was like a real tug of war with that thing. Or if there was something that I really didn't want, it was really like a battle against it. And there were a few very clear shifting moments where it was just like, whoa, and something, seemed to like it felt like I've said before, like the windows opened up and it was just like this breeze blew through and it was like, whoa, okay. And there was like an insight quality of that.
Hmm.
Now, the um what I would say is what is different is there is still enjoyment of things, but there isn't a need for those things. If a
Hmm.
thought about something arises, it's no longer craving. It's just the mind creating some idea from something. Like I say in the book about it's basically like having a television advertising station in the head all the time, that it's always trying to sell us something.
Right.
It's something, it's either, it's going to promising to improve something or it's distracting us from something, but it's basically the mind is just running advertisements all the time. And it's a question of do you immediately run out and buy what is being advertised to you or not? And you can recognize, if somebody in your normal life came up to you and said, that you should, well, actually, this is funny because it reminds me, we were at a doctor's office recently, and um, the person who worked there was saying they had some years ago when they were in their 20s, uh, they had a patient who said they just came back from Denmark, and Denmark was lovely and really nice people. And if you ever get a chance, you should go there. And literally, this person, never having known anything about Denmark, had never traveled anywhere in the world, on their lunch break, bought tickets to Denmark on a whim,
Whoa.
just because this patient said that it was such a nice place, they should try it out and check it out. So that is like basically the level at which most of us operate with the thoughts in our mind. That the mind
Right.
says donut and the body goes, yeah, I should have a donut. Here we go. And there's like no question that I should have a pause there and maybe could choose or not whether to have the donut or, whether it has to be a foregone conclusion because it's there. So what we're talking about is that we recognize that aversion and craving don't actually exist. It's a certain pattern of thinking that comes in the mind. There's a certain pattern of sensation in the body. And there's a disconnect there, which we've talked about in the past, that once that is very clearly seen and felt in the body, like there is this true recognition that, oh, I never have to buy anything I see in another advertisement again. The mind can throw it out, but it is just a suggestion and you never need to actually do anything about that. So it's not to say that the mind will suddenly stop suggesting anything, the mind is going to
Right.
do what it does. Um, but you don't have to buy into it. Likewise, with aversion, it's all about our resistance to life, basically. It's I am feeling achy in my back. That's not a problem. The problem is my resistance. I don't want to feel achy in my back. I want to have a back that I don't even know is there because it feels so neutral. I don't even want to know I have a back. So that sets up that resistance. Okay, well, can you be okay just feeling an achiness in the back and not needing to do something to react to that or fix it or change it or make things better or can you live without that resistance? That can absolutely change. And so I think what I would say to if I was gonna, because again, I don't know exactly what she meant when she said it, because again, we
Right.
can't jump into somebody else's experience. If I was going to say
Right.
that, I might say when the belief in craving and aversion falls away, because I do believe that that belief, once you really clearly see that that's the case, is not coming back. And once you develop that toolkit of recognizing as it's happening, just these ads that are showing up in the mind and that ability to not have to jump on it and react to it, that equanimity that is there in its place, it keeps you from needing to do anything again. But it's not to say that, I think we all have so much conditioning that needs to be worked with and take a while. If you are somebody who were constantly conditioned to eating every time you got stressed, that feeling of like stress being a problem, you feel like you're stressed and then there's an urge to do the thing, there might still be like a reaching out for something, right? You might need to work with that and find out, okay, so I know I don't actually have to go to the refrigerator every time I feel stressed now. That was just a suggestion. Now I can work with just that feeling of stress. And there's a feeling of resistance to feeling that stress. Okay, well, now I can work with that resistance. Can I just feel stress in the body and be equanimous with that? So we can start to work with all the different aspects that create that feeling of resistance in the first place, or the feeling of craving in the first place. Um, the reason why we talk about the second fetter being so tied in with the fourth and the fifth is that craving and aversion don't really, well, they don't exist on their own, and they certainly don't quasi exist in a vacuum. They're coming about largely because we have this unresolved second fetter stuff that is prompting us to constantly try to make ourselves feel more comfortable by indulging in something or running away from what feels, miserable in the body.
So then, is it fair to say that we don't really, I don't know how to, what the best language is to use. It all seems kind of poor to me, but is it fair to say that we haven't really seen through or dissolved Fetters 4 and 5 until we have done a sufficient amount of work with Fetter 2?
Well, yes and no. So the way that because with like Kevin and Christiane, the way they work with it, they don't really work with Fetter 2 at all, right? They use they use the sort of original Buddhist foundation that's just doubt, which is
Right.
like, doubt in the practice, doubt in our ability to become awake and all of that stuff. The way we work with it is more of Pernilla's invention, where we're tying in all of the therapy stuff that they don't work with in that form of working with the Fetters. So because of that, when Kevin and Christiane talk about Fetters 4 and 5, you have the primary sensation that comes up, right? So you're in any given situation and there's like somebody uh says something to you at work that makes you feel a certain way, or you uh get you're yeah, you're out traveling and you're stressed, and so you go to eat something, to grab a snack or something like that. In the way that they work with it, they're only working with the reaction to the primary sensation. So the primary sensation is you're at work, somebody says, oh, you did a really terrible job on this, and you're gonna have to redo it, and you're gonna have to work all weekend to redo all this work that you just did, and you feel that immediate pang of something in the body.
Right.
4 and 5 is just what you do from that point on. The pang is there. The question is now, do you have to lash out and yell at the person? Do you have to pout? Do you have to, go through all these tirades in your mind about it? Do you have to turn and go get, a drink or something to numb yourself? All of that is the reactivity of 4 and 5. But it doesn't deal at all with the primary pang, with that primary sensation that comes about. So when you're stressed or when you have, feelings of yeah, all the emotional stuff, all the trauma, all that stuff that causes that primary sensation, it doesn't work with any of that. It's just how do we relate to it? Do we need to get angry? Do we need to eat our feelings away? Do we need to get drunk? Do we need to? Um, and so for that, you can clearly see no. But then you're just left sitting with whatever miserable sensations are there because you haven't actually worked with any of that yet. Right? If you haven't done any second fetter work, you can kind of condition yourself to be in a situation where no matter how uh you know miserable you are, how much your trauma is being activated, no matter how whatever comes up is up, you can condition yourself to just like being passive and not actively relating to it. But it still leaves you being a very traumatic, internally kind of reactive person. So with the second fetter stuff, we're working with all the things that we talk about all the time, where you're actually getting to the root of it. So why is that primary sensation even occurring in the first place? Is there a reason why somebody saying that you've done a terrible job hits you in a way that is so much harder than somebody else is like, yeah, that's all right. I've done better. I know I didn't do that great on it, or well, that's your opinion. There's a difference there. And so that is super, super relevant. Yes, it's good to work with the 4 5 side of things so that when somebody gives you a piece of critical or critique that you don't fly off the handle and throw a stapler at them. That's great. And even to have that like internal sense of I'm okay just feeling the uncomfortable sensations that come up when somebody criticizes me. That's great, super useful to have, really, really valuable. But the question is, still stands. Why do you have that particular reactivity in the first place? And can we work
Right.
with that?
Well,
So
and then the stories I've heard repeatedly over the last, oh, however many years is that, you get these people who they do the work, they get the results, and some of them are even, respected or revered teachers, and then next thing you know, they're either acting out badly or, and this is the one I've heard more of in recent years. They've done all this work. People are saying, this person has, they've done the work, they've gotten the results, but now they're in therapy.
yeah, exactly.
And there's nothing
Exactly.
wrong with that, but it just seems
No,
it just seems kind of cross purposes.
exactly. And that's why we work with it all together because it is all interconnected. I mean, you can't separate one part of the awakening path from anything else. It's all human life. There's literally it is what's creating all of it. The illusions that we take to be the self and craving and aversion and separation and all of those things are being created by this same system, which has been conditioned in a way. And the conditioning is part of it. So why not work with the conditioning as well? That is
Absolutely.
that's why we are seeing the world the way that it is.
So if you're going to sum it up, and I realize I realize what I'm asking, but if you're going to try to sum it up in a fairly succinct and very general way, kind of a one size fits all, how would you say a person, and I'm going to phrase this very carefully, might recognize that they have managed to cross that initial threshold with 4 and 5?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I can speak from my own personal experience, which was there were a few decisive moments where when I was doing the Kevin and Christiane kind of work through I think there was I was feeling kind of, reactive about somebody I felt had was like taking advantage of me in a way, and I had felt this kind of like kind of gripping going on, and so I sat with that, and in one of those cases, I had one of those like like just insight moments of where that just fell away. And another one of the big ones was about I had this idea of lack. And I remember I was walking around the block and it was like this idea of like a lack of time, a lack of money, a lack of, and I had this like about that a lack can only exist in mental comparison to another time, right? Like you cannot experience lack as it is. You have to imagine something else which is here that's not actually here and then compare the two basically. And there was such a jolting poof from that. And those and a couple other, there were definitely some other smaller things along the way. They basically shifted the scales so that I started to recognize what was really happening. That and it was also part of the doing the actual, investigation of what it felt like to be craving something, to actively be craving something, or to actively not want something. And doing those, it broke the sort of monolithic experience of craving into its parts so that I was able to recognize that it didn't really exist. And then from then on, it was like noticing, like I said about the television advertisements, that's just, I don't need anything to be different than it is. I don't need to have whatever. If I think of a brownie, I don't have to have a brownie. I can just recognize I just had a ghost flavor of a brownie in my mouth. I just saw an image of a brownie. How odd is that? And it doesn't need to go any further than that. There was like I had done a practice at one point where it was like I would felt like I wanted it was something from the freezer, and so I would pull it out and I would like like I was gonna have it, and I would put it on the table, and then I'll put it back in the freezer. And there's this feeling of like, no, it was like this little child that was like, no, 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 I want that. And so it was working with that. And it was just like being, hold on, there's this sensation here, there's that thing. How are they connected? And really breaking the whole thing down into recognizing that it's completely unnecessary. And so that just it took a bit of a while, but I think there was enough reconditioning that was happening while I was doing that work as well as you know having some really good insight moments where things just really the 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 kind of paradigm just kind of shifts about how you see any of this stuff. So what I would say in general is you recognize the mind is still being a mind. It's still suggesting things, but do you need to actually follow through with any of those? Does it really feel like there's um, not just that you're not um, running off to get the donut, but does it feel like you are actively fighting against that urge to get the donut? Because that
Right.
still requires more investigation then. It should be this effortless falling away where you just realize that it's like, you know, you see a giraffe walk by on the TV, you don't have to go and get a giraffe. Like it doesn't equate. And the same thing can be for anything else that you once had cravings for. It doesn't have to be something that you have to fulfill. It's just a giraffe walking by on a TV screen. So it's really noting that, and then the aversive sense of, do you have to react to something? Can you be with the primary discomfort of somebody cutting you off in traffic or somebody, um, whatever your pet peeve is, everybody is different, but can you be with the primary discomfort of that without needing to jump to some other distraction or deflection or reaction? And if yes, then you're in good shape. But always stay mindful of it because these things can come back. The conditioning can keep coming back in different ways. And, I mean, we've talked to people who they feel like they've broken 4 and 5. They feel like they have had, these, but then they kind of stop being aware. They stop inquiring in some fashion because you kind of get like, yeah, okay, I'm done. And then your old conditioning just keeps coming back again. And then you have that, well, I had it and then I lost it thing. It came back. Well, it didn't really come back. 4 and 5 never existed. Fetters don't exist, right?
Right.
It's not something that you have physically broken or gotten rid of. It's a pattern of thinking and a pattern of behavior which temporarily shifted, but you didn't continue with it long enough to make it a lifelong habit. Your old habitual patterns that you've been doing for decades just came in and they re-strengthened. Those neural pathways have always been there. Now you have just not done quite enough work to get to reinforce the new neural pathways, so the old ones got took over again.
I think and this is really, I'm just going to be speaking for myself, and I recognize that some people may balk at how I'm saying this, but I'm saying this at least to myself this way for a particular reason. It seems like the wise attitude is to have one of you're never finished. If you're
Yeah,
still breathing, you're not done.
exactly. I agree 100%. Yeah, I think life is too unpredictable. The human biology is too unpredictable. There are too many influences and, too many causes and conditions throughout everything to believe that anything is going to stay the way that it is indefinitely. Plus the fact that we know permanence does not exist. Nothing is
Right.
permanent. We're in a constant state of evolution. Why would we think that, you can't go back to the way things were for decades, So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Well, we've been at it for 2.5 hours.
We have. I think it's been a good session though.
It's been a freaking great session. It really has. This has been, yeah. Uh, and this may sound kind of, oh, I can't think of the word, but it may sound kind of disingenuous, but it's really not. I really mean it. Every session has been great, and it seems like as time has gone by, they just get better and better.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, I mean, it just seems like the
Thank you.
further along we go, the deeper we dig, the more there is to say about it, and shining lights on areas where maybe the popular books of the day about the subject don't really get to. I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of really excellent and useful things that are discussed and brought up in these dialogues.
Thank you for that. I'm happy, and I'm always happy when people comment and say that they're really getting something out of it, and
Me too.
it's nice to, it's nice. I'm really, again, grateful that you're doing this because I've seen, the reach that it has gotten with people and that it's like, people get their own little private sessions in a way because
Yeah.
we're not
Well,
that
and
deep.
that's the big thing, and it really helped a lot. It really kind of hit home when you sent me the email about that. I wish I could remember his name. Oh, and
Marcus.
yeah,
Yeah.
on Discord, saying that, and to be able to respond to him too as well, to let him know that thank you, that meant a lot because it really does. I mean, if it would still be valuable beyond measure if the only person it was benefiting was me. But the fact that it's not, the fact that like you said, it has a very far reach and it's touching other people, if it was valuable beyond measure, then I don't even know how to begin to try to talk about how it changes or increases that value when it touches the lives of other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I so respect that and appreciate that. And I'm so grateful we have this opportunity.
Me too. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, just one little thing different, and might never have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, here we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay,
All right.
talk to you when I talk
Bye.
to you.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.